I'm Sarah Lennox. I'm on the Northampton Neighbors Board and on the Speaker Series Committee, and I'd like to welcome you to a new fall series of talks by the Speaker Series, which I am sure will be just as interesting and entertaining as those in the past. So first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Northampton Neighbors and how the session today will run, and then I'll introduce Pat Romney, the star of the afternoon. So as some of you know, Northampton Neighbors launched in November 2017. So we're 5 years old, as you may have noticed at our great birthday party in August. We now have 1,294 members, which is pretty amazing and pretty terrific. We're really, really proud of that. We're part, as you may know, we're part of an international movement called the Village Movement. And villages are dedicated to providing older people in particular locations with the services and social and cultural connections they need to stay in their own homes as they age. Northampton Neighbors is open to anyone, anywhere, but we provide services performed by our volunteers to anyone over 55 living in Northampton, Florence, and Leeds. One of the great things about Northampton Neighbors is that we're free, which means that anyone can join, not just those with means. We're one of the very few villages that charges no fee. So even during the worst of COVID, we found lots of ways to get together on Zoom, including interest groups like gardening and book discussions and food interests, neighborhood circles in various areas around the city, and of course, this speaker series. Those of you who've been around for a while might remember that we hosted some great speakers in the Senior Center, but they've been just as great since beginning in May 2020. We decided to resort to Zoom, which has worked out really well and allowed people to engage in social events at a time when they couldn't gather in person. But now, besides offering services again, and if you haven't asked for services and you need them, please let us know. We've also geared up again to provide in-person events, including the Mix and Mingle, which is an informal get-together at Spoletos on October 18th from 4 to 6, and Sandwiches and Stories, which will take place on October 25th from 12:30 to 1:30 on the historic Northampton Terrace. Both of those events are outside, so you can feel rather safe in participating in them. So we hope to see you there in person as well as on the screen right now. So what's going to happen today? Pat is going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then she'd like to respond to your questions. We found out that the best way to do that is to ask people to put their questions in the chat, which you do by clicking on the chat icon at the bottom of the page and typing a question in the space that comes up on the right-hand side of the screen. And don't forget to press enter or else we can't see your question.
We'd like to start with questions in the chat so we don't wind up with everybody talking at once. But if we have time at the end, we can allow people to unmute themselves and ask questions directly. If you have trouble hearing or would like to read along as well as listening, click on CC at the bottom of the page, which will give you a transcript. CC stands for closed captioning, which will give you a transcript that you can follow along. We also want to tell you that this event is being recorded, and if you'd rather not show up in the recording, just turn your camera off. The best way to watch this is in speaker view rather than gallery view, which means you see this, you'll see Pat and me rather than all those other little faces. So if you want to switch to speaker view, go up to the top right-hand corner and click on speaker rather than gallery. And if you'd like to hear the talk again or recommend it to your friends, it will be available on the Northampton Neighbors YouTube site, which you can also get to from our website, and on Northampton Open Media, Channel 12, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 a.m. And Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 7 p.m. And now to our star attraction and the main event, Pat Romney. So Pat is a longtime clinical and organizational psychologist and is currently a leadership coach to academic and human services professionals. And she also has a small psychotherapy practice focused on elders and their families. For 20 years, she taught at Hampshire and Mount Holyoke colleges and wrote more than 20 articles and papers. And she's still an active scholar. For the past 30 years, she's been involved in dialogue work, large-scale diversity initiatives, leadership development, and team building, as well as professional coaching of individual faculty and administrators in academia. And just to show how close her concerns are to ours, she was a founding board member of Amherst Neighbors and served as co-chair of the fundraising committee. Today, she's going to be talking to us about a topic that could not be more relevant at this moment, aging well, the importance of community and equity. So Pat, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Northampton Neighbors, and Sarah for inviting me, and Linda Terry from Amherst Neighbors for passing my name along. I'm excited to see many friends on the screen. Giving a shout out to Jenny McKenna, and good to see my Mount Holyoke and Hampshire colleagues, Myrna Breitbart and Francine Deutsch, and lots of other people. So it's really great to be with you today. So I'm talking about aging well, the importance of community and equity. And it is a talk that it's a reprise of a talk that I gave for Amherst Neighbors launch about a year ago. So I'm wondering if you, like me, ever think about how long you're going to live. Maybe it's a preoccupation for those of us in our elder years. Being 78 myself, which according to the CDC is 1 year beyond the average life expectancy for US citizens, makes me think about it often. More pointedly, the average life expectancy in the US is 72 for non-Hispanic Blacks. So I've passed my expected expiration date, so to speak. And that makes me a little nervous, if you know what I mean. So I've decided to do my own kind of actuarial formulation. So a little bit, it's not that complicated, but I thought about, my parents, and I thought, well, I'm healthier than my mom was at my age, and not as healthy as my father was at my age. My father died at 88. My mother died at 88, and my father died at 104. So I kind of averaged in my head and said, well, maybe I can, maybe I think I'll live to about 96, right? Not bad, I was thinking to myself. Well, as we all know, only about 25% in the variation in human lifespan is determined by genetics. So that's not saying very much. When I tell people my father lived to 104, they say, wow, and that was in 2000. Now many more people are becoming, living over past 100. But my father was born in 1896 and lived until 2000. So he lived a very long life, touching 3 centuries. But again, as we know, our genetics don't have everything or even that much to do with our lifespan. When I was talking with my Amherst Neighbor colleague, Teresa Ahrens, she reminded me that it's not just how long we live, but how well we live. So that was something that I began to give a lot of thought to. I think about that, doing work with elders and their families in my clinical practice, and it's led me to some deep reflection and deep reading over the last several years. And I'd like to share some of what I've learned with you. How many of you have heard of the blue zones? Raise your hands, I'm looking at you. So pretty familiar with the blue zone. Those are the regions identified and studied by Dan Butner, the regions of the world that have the greatest number of centenarians. The blue zones that he's identified are Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Icaria in Greece. And to that, they've added Loma Linda, California, which is a community of Seventh-day Adventists, Adventists. And as you may know, Seventh-day Adventists are vegetarian and very, very health-oriented. Butner and his colleagues identified 9 lifestyle variables that contributed to longevity in inhabitants of the blue zones. Of course, these are retrospective accounts, right? They look back at what people were doing, those people who lived to be over 100. So moderate exercise, regular physical exercise was one of the 9 characteristics that contributed to long life. As we probably know, more recent research on dementia prevention speaks about stepping up the intensity of our exercise beyond the moderate, right, to keep our brains healthy and active. The second area that Butner identified was having life purpose. Third, reducing stress, keeping a moderate calorie intake, having a plant-based diet, moderate alcohol intake, especially using red wine when you do have alcohol intake, being engaged in religion or spirituality, being engaged in family life, and being engaged in having a social life, an active social life. When I gave this talk last year in 2021 with Amherst Neighbors, I stated that I was good with about 4.5 of those 9 and actively in pursuit of 4 others, 4.5 others. But I'm happy to say today that I've stepped up my game and I'm good with about 7 out of those 9.
Yeah.
Right? It's never too late to step up our games. The single most important thing that the blue zones identify is diet, right? Moderate calorie, plant-based diet. That's hard for me because I'm a long-term foodie. I love food. But Butner and his colleagues remind us that it all works together. And I was impressed by that. And I signed up for their free newsletter and the Blue Zone cookbook. And, you know, thought, well, maybe I could live to more than 96. Maybe I could really make it to 100. In pursuit of living long and aging well, I also read Keep Sharp, Build a Better Brain at Any Age by Sanjay Gupta, who many of you know is a CNN commentator and a neurosurgeon. And his book isn't about aging per se, but he advises us to put our brains first and tells us that everything else will follow if we pay attention to good brain health. That's important for all of us who worry about dementia and the increasing incidence of Alzheimer's among older adults. So the Blue Zones have 9 areas of focus to promote longevity, and Keep Sharp has 5 pillars for the brain. Some of them are repetitious. 1, move. Exercise, Gupta says, is like a first aid kit for damaged brain cells. He recommends 150 minutes per week of exercise. Second thing he mentions is to discover, engage with a new hobby, learn a new language, volunteer for Northampton Neighbors, travel. I'm working on Italian as a new language, and it's lots of fun. His third pillar is relax, put your feet up, sleep, keep stress at bay. Right? And the fourth is to nourish ourselves. Particularly, he emphasizes eating nuts and seeds and whole foods and whole grains. And he says that's consistently associated with minimizing cognitive decline. The fifth piece is one that I've been thinking a lot about and working on a lot over the last couple of years. The fifth pillar of a good brain is connecting with others. And he points out that connecting in a face-to-face situation is more effective than completing a crossword puzzle or a Wordle, I'm a Wordle fanatic now, alone, right? We want to connect with others in as much as often in face-to-face contact as we can. And I know we worry often about COVID and staying safe, and some of my friends and people that I see, you know, really, I think, are staying too isolated for too long. So try to get out there, you know, wear our masks, do what we have to do. My husband and I do a weekly movie, and we went to Amherst Cinema on Monday night to see a fabulous movie, and there were 2 people, him and me. in the movies. So it's not as crowded out there as you might think it could be. So connecting with others in face-to-face situations is really important for our brains. So now I'd like to talk to you about another really, really favorite nonfiction book that has been shaping my life in the last couple of years. And I'd love to see a raise of hands on this. How many people have read Together, Loneliness, Health, and What Happens When We Find Connection by Dr. Vivek Murthy? Good. So I'd love to see more hands. This is a book that we should all be reading. Vivek Murthy was Surgeon General under Obama and Trump and Biden. And his book, Together, Loneliness, Health, and What Happens When We Find Connection is a vital read for those of us who are those older adults that we are. Through research, personal story, and clinical experience, Murthy demonstrates that we are hardwired for connection. And he makes a really dramatic claim, or several really dramatic claims. Right? He says that people with strong social relationships are 50% less likely to die prematurely than people with weak social relationships. Remember, I started on this thinking about how he's going to try to live to 100. And he makes another claim, where really this is based on his research. The impact of lacking social connection is greater than the risk associated with obesity, excess alcohol consumption, or lack of exercise. Let's think about that for a minute. Because we're all have been talking, if you're in the same, we're roughly in the same circles, you're on the other side of the river. We're talking all the time, of course, about not smoking. We've been really letting cigarettes go for many decades now, right? We know that we shouldn't consume too much alcohol. And we know, and we talk often about, maintaining the right weight and exercising, and people are in the gym and working out. And Murthy says that social connection is more important than all those others in combination in terms of sustaining our lives, right? The human need for social connection is more than a simple feeling or convenience. It's a biological and social imperative rooted in thousands of years of human evolution. Loneliness can kill, Murthy tells us, but connection can heal. So being connected can help us live longer, and this has everything to do with living well. And it does connect to Sanjay Gupta's pillar number 5, connect, and Blue Zone's variable number 8, family relations and community and social engagement. So Murthy talks about 3 circles of connection. And I'd like us to think about this. I'd ask you to reflect on who are the people in each of these circles of connection. How many people are there in these circles of connection? His inner circle is the circle of intimate relationships, close friends and confidants, sometimes our partners, doesn't have to be a partner, but our close friends and confidants, our besties, right? The person you can call at any time of the day or night if you need something, the person you can share your deep concerns and passions and all the things that you care about. So how many of us can think of at least one, and maybe 2 or 3, or maybe more, we have in our inner circle of close, intimate relations? And then he says there's another middle circle, right? And that's the circle of occasional companions, just as vital. In this social region, we don't necessarily know one another's deepest secrets, but we enjoy having our lives intersect, right? We enjoy getting together and being together and laughing and joking, right? And traveling sometimes together and doing things together. And that middle circle of friends, Murthy tells us, provide a vital buffer against what he calls relational loneliness. Right? And then he talks about the outer circle of amicable acquaintances, occasional interactions in our workplaces, our neighborhoods, through civic and social organizations, places of worship, even online, right? Where there's a sense of shared purpose and interest with a set of people that helps us stave off collective loneliness. You know, it's really interesting. Murthy's father, maybe both of his parents were physicians, and it's fascinating to me that part of the personal stories he tells in his book Together are about the relationships that his parents had with their patients, right? So he's looking at, you know, big data sources for his research and his understanding of the importance of connection, but then he has these clinical and personal experiences from his own family life. So when we think about Northampton neighbors, Amherst neighbors, we're talking about that outer circle of amicable acquaintances, right? But part of the work that we're doing when we work and, you know, interact with each other in our small villages is making friends that become even closer, that move into that middle circle of relationships. So with those kinds of things, and I'm thinking, you know, back when I started doing this reading, okay, so 100 is starting to look pretty good, right? Because I'm doing all those things and doing more of them as I continue to do my reading, right? Most of us can form new middle circle friendships just like we did when we were kids by joining groups. And this is one of the reasons why my husband, Paul, who's also on the call today, on the Zoom today, and I have started doing some work with Joy Pods, bringing people together to start building friendships around joy, right? Belonging to a group can help reduce stress. It can repair emotional damage. It can promote meaning and purpose in life. So if there's anybody here who hasn't joined Northampton Neighbors yet and who lives in Northampton, please join. And if you're in Amherst and you haven't joined Amherst Neighbors, please join. And if you live in a community where there's a village, find that village, because it's such a great starting place for relationships and connections. You can go to vtvnetwork.org. Okay? VTV, village to village, vtvnetwork.org. And there are maps there. You can look, you can punch in your town, Arlington, and see if there's a village there. And if there isn't a village there and you're and you're an older adult, then you can create a village. And it's so much fun to do and create so many wonderful relationships. So one important key to high quality relationships also is the exchange of help, which is what our villages are based on. That you can call somebody and say, I just had surgery, I can't mow my lawn, but if you need help figuring out how to use Zoom, I can do that for you, right? So the exchange of help really gives us high quality connections. And this is important because when I talk with many people who are older adults, they are reluctant to seek help. They feel like it puts them in a position where they're needy or they're old or they're inadequate in some way. And that's not what it's about. It really is about connecting and giving and getting what we need for each other and from each other as we age. And so when it goes to living long and living well, it's eating well, exercise, strong relationships are what matter most. Well, I said I was also going to talk about community and equity. So where does equity fit in here? When I look at my community in Amherst, a few thoughts come to mind, and I would ask you to think about Northampton as making these remarks. In the depths of the pandemic, one of my neighbors in Amherst, Isolda Ortega, made an appeal. She wrote to a few people and she said, "We appeal to you, our friends and neighbors, to join us in supporting hardworking families in Amherst who are slipping through the safety net. We are in contact with 50 families in Amherst in desperate need of immediate funds to pay for food, cleaning supplies, toiletries, utilities, phone service, safe transportation, over-the-counter medications, and other basic needs. These neighbors work primarily in the service industry, in restaurants and hospitality, and have been out of work for weeks." Well, that situation hopefully no longer obtains now that restaurants are back open, but we also have rising prices at every level, right? Fuel prices, food prices, all kinds of prices are going through the roof. And those among us in our communities who are least fortunate, who are more low income, I hate the term working poor. What a a crazy thing to think that there are people who can work and also be poor, right? So we still have that same situation. And I was troubled when I got that email from Isolda, but also, more importantly, I was troubled because I didn't know who those people were. I had no relationships with people experiencing that level of deprivation, and that didn't feel good to me. Another instance of my own limited knowledge occurred when my team and I were consulting to the Amherst Police Department. I learned then that we have an homeless encampment in Amherst. I didn't know that. To see occasional homeless folks on the street downtown, but an encampment, knew nothing about it. Another piece of ignorance and really oblivion. The homeless people living in Amherst and living in Northampton and sleeping in Amherst and sleeping in Northampton are our neighbors too. Homeless neighbors. Is there a homeless encampment in Northampton? Anybody know? Yes, yes, right. So thank goodness, we can begin to pay attention to those things. I know in Amherst, for Amherst Neighbors, John Hornet does a lot of work on affordable housing in our community. I hope you know who in your community is doing work on affordable housing, who in your community is really reaching out to those neighbors. We are in a situation where food insecurity in colleges today is at the level of 20 to 40%. 20 to 40% of our students, of college students, are food insecure. In our generations, those of you who are at my age, 60s, 70s, 80s, that would be unheard of, right? Maybe the occasional person. But to be in college and not have enough to eat was something that, we just didn't hear about. So the question comes back to us, how can we live long and well when those surrounding us are not? How can we be safe when those surrounding us are not safe? For me, it's a big challenge, and I hope it's one for all of us. I don't care to focus on living to 100 while my neighbors, homeless people, students, low-wage workers, working poor, have no safe and secure place to lay their head or food enough to feed their families. Thankfully, we have many, many service organizations in our community that are helping, but what are we doing individually? Maybe some of the harsher realities about your community touch your heart or trouble your conscience, or give you a call to a sense of purpose or a way to build community. Truly equitable and fair societies are likely to be more prosperous and more harmonious. Failure to tackle discrimination and to promote equal opportunity hurts families, individuals and families, and negatively impacts all of us and costs us. We need to be concerned in our communities about livability, about productivity, about confidence and safety. So, at the beginning, Sarah made a wonderful invitation for people to join Amherst Neighbors. Invite your neighbors to join, sure. To create neighbor-to-neighbor connections, sure. But also think about who your neighbors are. Where are the homeless people? Where are the people of color? What connections do they have, or do you have to the shelters in your community? Is your membership, and we ask ourselves this in Amherst Neighbors and really work hard on it, is your membership made up mostly of middle-class white residents, right, who are looking to, improve our lives, right, and to make connections, but where are the rest of our community? So doing the work of expanding our networks, seeing beyond the same circles of friends whose identities are the same as ours, whose income levels resemble our own, who live down the street from where we live, is going to take some work, right? It's going to necessitate making some changes in our lives and in our way of thinking about the world. In a way, in a word, it may require you to pivot. So that leads me to recommend one last book, Sean Ginwright's book, The Four Pivots, Reimagining Justice, Reimagining Ourselves. Dr. Ginwright is not talking about elders or older adults. I like the word elders and really hate the word elderly, right? Because there was a time and a place, and still in many societies, where the term elder really carries some cachet in the best possible sense of the word, right? That people who are respected, who are cared for, who are cared about, and who still have potential to contribute to the world. Ginwright asked us to develop awareness to promote justice. Awareness by pivoting from what he calls a lens to a mirror, by taking a look at ourselves and asking ourselves, what are we doing to promote justice? He asks us to use a second pivot, or to make a second pivot, by engaging in transformational rather than transactional relationships. And that makes me think of going to the grocery store or to the restaurant and tipping a waiter, or making contact with someone who's a service deliverer, service provider to us in a very transactional way, but we don't have any transformation. We don't really know them, right? We're not really engaged with them. We're not really connected with them. His third pivot is about building vision to create possibilities, and his fourth is to move from hustle to flow. Those two first ones, our own awareness and our engagement in transaction and transformative relationships, are what we need in order to build justice in our communities. We can make changes no matter how old we are. In fact, we have to change ourselves and our society. There's no peace for us unless we really do. Martin Luther King said, in a real sense, all life is interrelated. We are all caught up in this quote that you're so familiar with, in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one of us directly affects us all indirectly. So in conclusion, my takeaways are, if we want to live long and prosper, to use that old expression, we have to eat healthy, we have to move as much as possible, we have to tend and befriend one another, and we have to take care of the less fortunate. It's our duty, it's our obligation, it's good for our bodies, it's good for our souls. We'll sleep better at night, and you probably know as I do, that good sleep is harder and harder to come by as we age. There's an old African proverb, if you want to go fast, walk alone. If you want to go far, walk together. I think together, in the creation of connection, we can find the paths we need to living longer and living well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pat. That's really inspirational. We found that unmuting to clap in Zoom doesn't actually work very well, but please know that we are all clapping virtually. So before we go to the questions, and I see there are already questions in the chat, and if you have more, please put them in now. Before we go to the questions, I have a little word from your sponsor. As I said at the beginning, Northampton Neighbors is free, but that doesn't mean we don't have expenses, so we have to rely on donations. So we really appreciate your helping us out, if you can, by going to our website and clicking on the donate button, and you can donate by credit card, PayPal, or check. And now I'm going to go to our questions if I can figure out how to do that. Okay. First question is, what's the status of the end of life choice legislation in Massachusetts? Does anybody know that? Pat, do you know that?
I don't know it. I don't know it. I wonder if anybody else does. And then I have a question I want to go to Sarah next. But does anyone know the answer to that? I don't. I support it, but I don't know where it stands right now.
Right.
I have now allowed people to unmute themselves. If someone knows the answer to that question, please unmute yourself. Pat
Okay.
Foreman has unmuted.
Yeah. The last that I heard that it was still stuck in the legislature where it's been for a while. So I don't know if that's changed since I heard it. I've only moved here about 6 months ago. And when I came, that's what I was told. So I don't know if it's moved. I'll look into it at some point and I'll let you know.
Good.
Yeah.
I'd love to go to this question that Fran Deutsch raises about relationships with adult children and what role that plays in positive aging. And I don't have research data on that, but I'm going to speak to it from my own experience and from my experience with some of my patients. And I think we all know.
No.
I think am I good? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what you may have missed, but I'm going to speak about the question about relationships with adult children. Obviously, and of course, they're really important in our lives. I'm going to go to a really good place, a special place. Those of us who have grandchildren know what a dear and special thing grandchildren are to those of us who are fortunate to have them, really enriching our lives and bringing joy and hope and every other kind of positive emotion that you can think of. Paul and I are lucky to have little ones still, ranging from the ages of 4 to 16. So we're still lucky to be able to enjoy them. Having relationships with our children is extremely important. And at the same time, we're seeing a huge surge in family estrangement. I was talking this morning with a friend, a family member actually, who said, the kids are going to regret that they are, estranged from their families. And I'm not so sure that's true, because their values are quite, the Gen Z and the older ones, their values are quite different than the values that we had in our generation. I'll do some disclosure here to say that I have an estranged relationship with one of my children. It's very sad and very painful, and I have good relationships with 3 of them, so that also is wonderful. But it's very, very, very difficult when there is family estrangement. We love our kids. They're important to us. Each of us have done our best, as best we could, in raising them. And it's interesting because I'm writing now actually an essay about that topic, and I'll just take you to a personal place with it. One of my family members who has an estranged child said to me that she would pray every day for that child, right? Not for herself and not for the relationship, but for that child, right? And for their well-being. And I thought that was really touched me. To know that in the midst of feelings like anger and guilt and shame and, just the myriad of feelings that come up around family estrangement, that this mom took it to a place of love. And it really inspires me in my own situation, because I think that that's our role as parents, right? That's our role as mothers and fathers, and it's not easy, and we don't always feel that way. But to stay in a loving relationship with our kids, even if we don't see them, right? Even if they don't respond to us. But again, the question really was about relationships with our adult children. And of course, they're important. And of course, they tell us, they're more in charge of our relationships with them than we were when we were parents. We were in charge, now they're in charge. And we have to bend a little bit to that, and that's okay, that's good. They're adults and they have the right to do that. Very important to our well-being.
So there's, if y'all look in the chat, there is a response to the question of end of life choice. And the response is, alas, currently no active legislation. So those of you who think that's an important thing, contact your legislators and let's see if we can get the legislature moving. And here's a really interesting, useful question from Mark Carpel. Could you say a bit more about joy pods?
Thank you for that question, Mark, and nice to meet you over Zoom. He's highly respected psychologist in our area. So joy pods, I'm going to talk about it in two ways. A couple of years ago, I began to do a lot of thinking and reflecting about joy, starting with a poem by St. Augustine called Entering into Joy. For anybody who's spiritual or religious, that's a really wonderful poem to look up, because the poem really takes us to end of life around the issues of joy. And then I found Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama's book, The Book of Joy. Right? So I began thinking about that, and I also began experiencing a lot of joy. As many of you may know, elder years are considered to be the years in which we are most happy if we're not ill and if we're not in pain. Research has indicated that our elder years are our happiest. And I was feeling that in my own life and began to think about and wonder, how could I spread some of that? So with my colleagues, we did two things. One is we had a joy workshop at Mount Holyoke coming out of the pandemic. And we met with a small group of people. People were still nervous about getting out. And we talked about the research on joy, on the ways of achieving joy in life, how to define joy, how it's distinguished from happiness, meaning that it is something that resides at a deeper level. It's not about whether you feel good or feel bad or happy in one moment or happy in another moment, but really have at a deeper level what Seligman talks about when he talks about the meaningful life, right? That we have purpose and we have caring that really resides at a very deep level in our hearts and souls. So we did that joy workshop, and in fact, we are doing some more work on joy at the DA's summit in November. He has a summit annually for educators. And so we're going to be doing some more work on joy. And I was just saying to Paul the other day, it's interesting how things bubble up. So I mentioned those two books, but there's a team out of the Educational Collaborative that's doing work on joy and justice. There is a wonderful book called Pleasure Activism that talks about the joy of being an activist. So it's a theme that's bubbling up in our society. So we created a joy pod. We did a little pilot with some friends and colleagues of ours. And now we're running a joy pod at Mount Holyoke. And we're doing that for people who are working staff at Mount Holyoke. And we have each week several themes. The joy of together was one that or togetherness is one that we just did. We'll do one next week on the joy of music. We also do one on sadness and joy, sorrow and joy. What's the relationship between those two? Because we hold that it's impossible to live in deep joy unless you can connect with your deep sorrow and your deep pain, right? They're two sides of a coin. So that's a little bit about what we've been doing. So the joy pods are bringing people together to experience joy and principally to build connections with one another, kind of working on that second and third circle that Murthy talks about.
There's a wonderful comment here. How about a Northampton Neighbors program on enhancing joy? That sounds really cool, really cool. So I have a question that I've been thinking about ever since I knew what your title was. And I think it's an issue for villages in general. And it's a question about whether community and equity are so well combined in villages. And what I mean by that is in Northampton, I think we have not done well in bridging the class divide. You said that you fear that villages are mostly middle class and white, and right before the pandemic, a bunch of us went to the national convention, and yep, the villages are middle class and white. So what are your thoughts about how we can bring equity into our community?
So it's principally about relationships, right? It really is about relationships, and we have to keep working at it. But I just want to make the comment that I think in some ways we're late to the game if we're having this conversation in our villages, right? Because they're about relationships that we've started, way earlier in our communities.
Mhm.
We're walking in separate paths, and now we're saying, "Oh, hello over there, come join us," right? But there's no relationship. So that's one thing. I think it's really about building relationships. And I think also it's about figuring out what the needs are, what the interests are. And to some degree, and I'm just talking from my own personal lived experience, they're different, right? They are, people hang in different social groups and have different social networks. They're, I don't think I don't know in Amherst yet myself, what the interests and needs of my own community are, let me talk about the Black community, as we talk about and struggle with things like the racism that we confront on a daily basis, the reparations that we are currently considering, a shorter lifespan. I think that we haven't yet been able to put our finger on exactly what we can offer that will connect with other members of our communities who are underserved, right? And I would love to see us on both sides of the river begin to do some work, to begin to develop some funding, to begin to ask those questions. What do we need to know? What do we need to offer? What do we need to do to be able to serve everyone? Because it's not just about, who comes to a talk like this, right? But it's about those in our community who are aging and who need support, who we may not know about and may not see.
So I am also concerned. I completely agree, and that's a great idea about thinking, looking for funding and thinking about how we can do this. But I have also been concerned that middle class people communicate their class belonging in a way that makes people who aren't middle class feel like they don't belong there. And of course, middle class people don't know they're doing that because they're just acting what they consider normal. So I've been trying to think of vehicles for bringing people in and making them feel comfortable, and I'm a little bit baffled.
So I think thinking about the vehicles is helpful. But it makes me think a little bit about what Jen Wright is talking about when he talks about transactional versus transformation, right? So it's like, okay, what program can we have? What can we do? What can we offer? When I go back to who do we know, right? Who's my friend? Who's my neighbor? Who have I, passed in the grocery store? Who I can talk with and just become friendly with, right? And have a conversation with about what's happening in your life. We look like we're the same age. Where do you go to church? Where do you shop? What are you doing now that you're not working? And in fact, many people of color work longer than our white counterparts, right?
Yep.
In part because, white wealth is 10 times Black wealth, right? So many of us are working more and working longer. And so what does that mean? For myself, for example, I very rarely attend any of the, not never, but any of the online programming because I'm working, right? And it's not a need that I have yet, right? So I think it's about making connections with the people that we know and inviting them for a cup of tea or taking 5 minutes in the grocery store and just building a relationship, a connection, and finding out what people are doing. That's where I think it starts. People, person to person.
Excellent, 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 excellent. Nina, would you want to unmute people and see if people have person to person questions?
People can now unmute themselves.
Okay, so if anybody has questions, I will call on you. I'm going to go to gallery. Okay, here's Fran Deutsch has a question.
It's not exactly a question. It's more of a comment about, I was thinking about these different levels that you raised. And I don't know if it's a fourth level, but there's something about, I've lived in countries where people greet each other, where when you go to the store, people recognize you as someone who comes to their store. It seems on one level very superficial, but I feel so much happier when I live in an environment like that, where even what seems really, might seem really superficial, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's sort of a civil world where people see, yes, I see you every day. I don't know you, but hello, that kind of thing.
Remember the Maya Angelou poem that she delivered at, what's his name, inauguration, Bill Clinton's inauguration? And it ended, and say simply, very simply, good morning. I think it was good morning, it might be hello, yeah. Right? It's a thing I noticed when moving to the Valley, especially going around to different places, like when I used to do workshops a lot. I'm thinking I would go into a meeting at Smith or some other place and walk into a room, or people would walk in and I'd be standing there. They'd be coming for a workshop I was doing, and nobody said anything. They wouldn't even say hello. Wouldn't even walk into a room, see another human being, and not even say hello. I was talking to a friend from Latin America who says in the malls, when people sit down in the food courts, they sit next to each other and they say hello. We don't do that.
You know, it got a little better during COVID, I have to say, because I often try to say hello to people on the street, and people often just look away, like, what are you doing? But I noticed when I was walking during COVID, I think people were so starved for any kind of interaction that it sort of eased up a little bit. But I agree with you. That's exactly the experience I have here often.
And Paul makes the comment, you know, build relationships that send a message to others that says you're important to each other, and I need you, we need each other to build community. In the Black community, we use the expression about seeing one another and being seen. Right? And that's part of what that hello is. I see you. I see you. I recognize you as another human being.
Right, exactly.
A brother or sister in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Marcia has a question. Marcia Holden.
Still muted, Marcia. Not working.
Can't hear you.
We don't hear you. You're not muted.
Wonder if your sound is up on the volume on the bottom right.
Jane Bryden has, while Marcia's working on the sound, Jane Bryden.
A very quick comment that my husband and I live
I'm
on.
so sorry, I was on a different computer. Can you hear me now?
Wait, Marcia, now somebody else is speaking now, Marcia.
In the summertime. Part of
Okay, how about that?
my husband
hear
and I
me?
live on an
Wait.
island in the summertime. And the reason that we love it is it's an incredible community. Everybody cares for everybody else. It's a community of maybe 1,500 people. Everyone says hello. Everyone is just caring. That's why we love to be there. It's great.
Marcia,
Am I working now?
you are.
Okay. I'm sorry. I just wanted to affirm what you were saying, and everybody. So I was raised in Maryland, And we actually smile at one another on the street and say hi. And I remember, you know, one of my family members who comes up here, you know, and does it. And the message that she was getting, you know, from people was, oh, that's so superficial. But it isn't. It really isn't. It makes such a difference. But it is something that we notice when we move north. It's different.
Right.
I'd like to say something.
Sure.
I want to affirm Francine's observation too. I all the time say hi to people, and I can be 30 yards, 40 yards away from a person or a few people, and I will know that far away if they're going to say hello also or not. They just, people who don't do it, they just have a tighter walk, slumped shoulders, a little frown on the face. It's just amazing, you know, and I'll still say hi to them, trying to break that. I might even try to trip to make them laugh. I don't know. But I also wanted to say that I make an effort to lower my vocabulary and change my behavior somewhat when I'm talking with people from different subcultures, be it economic or intellectual or emotional, or just a plain subculture. I'll adapt. I think in Northampton, we have a very severe academic
Right.
and it even affects people who haven't been academic. You know, you jump into it. And that is a big wall. So like I play chess with a fellow who I could beat easily all the time. And I also give them rise places. I make sure before I help someone, I make them feel like a companion. And so we play chess and he wins half the time and I win half the time because I'm playing with him. You know, it's like, so at any rate, one of the things we really have a challenge of, probably in Amherst too, is we do live in an academic ghetto. And we need to break out of that. We need to realize that our ideas are no more important or real or powerful than someone's enjoyment of dance or drumming or even an evening at the pub. You know, it's the human experience of the heart. It's the important thing. So I think we need to break out of the academic ghetto, which is a wonderful ghetto, but we do need to break out of it.
Good point.
Pat, we're just about out of time, but I bet Pat might have some closing words for us.
I just want to thank you all for being here, and just say, you know, keep connecting and open up your eyes a little bit, even if it's in the walking into Amherst Cinema and sitting down and saying hello, or walking through the supermarket. You know, let's build those connections because we really need each other, and our villages have so much to offer. So thank you so much.
And thank you so much, Pat. This is really a rich and important conversation. And thank you so much for encouraging us to have it. And all the thank yous are coming into the chat right now. So thank you. We're really glad to have you share your ideas with us, and we will try to do our best to put them into practice.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.